I want to start out with a question. If I were to ask you what video game you first remember playing, would you remember? What memory jumps to mind when you think of this game? And have you played it recently? How did it hold up? The first game I remember playing is Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time. I'll use the term playing loosely here, as my brother plugged in a second controller and told me I could control Epona. Going back and playing that game, thankfully, it holds up. This isn't necessarily my favorite game, but it still invokes a sense of nostalgia when I think about it. The sentimental longing you get when thinking about the past. That's what nostalgia is. We don't have a lot of concrete research done on nostalgia and how it affects our purchasing habit, as it's hard to gauge what an emotion does to us. But in an industry as new as gaming, it's hard not to feel the longing for some of the first games we've ever played. They were likely closer to the start of the gaming industry. This past year, we saw two video games in particular from one company release: Pokemon Arceus and Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. I want to start with Arceus, which was released on the 28th of January 2022. As of September, it has sold 13 million copies. 6.5 million of those copies were sold on release. Pokemon Arceus was developed by Game Freak and published by Nintendo. This company has been creating video games since the 1990s and typically follows a 2D top-down style. It has evolved over the years, eventually becoming a 3D, still region-locked styled, if you will, with a very specific pattern of how you must play the game. There were some elements that came and went, such as the beauty contest, as some people are large fans of, I hope. But what stays consistent throughout the games is the gyms that you have to beat. In Pokemon Arceus, they attempted to break the mold by making the first ever open-world Pokemon game. While it was definitely considered a commercial success, the critical reception for the game was a little bit lackluster. We were met with frames dropping at random parts, and seeing a Gyarados from quite a ways away moving at 5 frames per second wasn't exactly easy or appealing on the eyes. Arceus took a franchise that, although was becoming stale, was very well fleshed out and played very smoothly, and decided to turn it on its head. It took a company that had no experience and no prior knowledge of how to create an open world game, and they just said, we're going to do it, and we're going to do it fast. Now, we obviously have no actual confirmation of how the Pokemon development cycle works, but it is rumored that 2 games are being worked at all times. There are 2 separate teams rather than one large team that work to develop Pokemon games, and that is the reason for such quick and rapid releases. Although Pokemon Arceus was not considered by any means a great open world game, the idea was that the next Pokemon might be a little bit better. It wasn't shortly after that Pokemon Scarlet and Violet was announced, and releasing on the 18th of November 2022, we were met with yet again a very broken game. This didn't stop the commercial success. Pokemon Scarlet and Violet quickly broke multiple records. It is the fastest selling Pokemon game. It is the fastest selling Switch game. It is the fastest selling Nintendo game. It is the fastest selling console exclusive across Sony, Microsoft, and Nintendo. And released very shortly behind it was God of War Ragnarok. This is a game that, although it invokes a certain amount of nostalgia around a group of people, is continuing to grow as it goes on. It was a sequel to the very successful spiritual reboot of God of War, which launched in 2018, but it only sold 5.1 million copies in 1 week. Pokemon Scarlet and Violet sold 10 million in 3 days. What went from being a game that most people thought others were going to write off for being a lackluster sequel to Pokemon Arceus became a world record setter, in a sense, for the video game industry, and it completely changed the standards that would be set and the precedents that would be set for further Pokemon games down the line. This is a problem. Pokemon games have never been perfect. There are always bugs. In any major game or release title, there will be something that is broken nowadays. It is very rare to get a day one video game that doesn't either require an enormous patch or is completely bug-free. I think I can comfortably say that God of War Ragnarok was one of those games that released in a very rare and beautiful, polished state. We also saw Elden Ring back in February 2022, I believe, And this game was also released in a very polished and beautiful state. Pokemon Scarlet and Violet has you ramming your head into a wall to look for shinies. It, rather than growing in the ability of making the game more accessible to a lot of people and making something like a shiny easier to see, it takes away a lot of those easy signals that there is a shiny here, and instead makes it so that you hopefully notice when you enter battle that a little ping has gone off and, oh, hooray, it's a shiny. Some of these Pokemon have literally a different colored eyeball. So we have a broken franchise at the moment, and we're still buying into it. There are a couple of causes for this, obviously. One of them is people are still pre-ordering video games. We're going to get into that a little bit later, though. But it also comes down to nostalgia, and people who grew up with Pokemon are having kids. This means that rather than sharing a copy of their Pokemon with their child, they're going to purchase another copy of Pokemon for their child. This continues to compile again and again and again, and pretty soon we're going to have 3 generations of people playing Pokemon. We have so much trust in this developer to provide us with an excellent game, a game that we will remember for a very long time, and in most regards, Nintendo and Game Freak are failing. You cannot put Pokemon up with other first-party titles, with games like the Metroid series or the Legend of Zelda series, or even to some degree the Animal Crossing series, where we have these beautiful and well-developed games that are getting delayed to make sure that they're done correctly. Instead, we're being given a money horse and being told to be happy with it. Nintendo has yet to confirm that they will be fixing any of the frame issues on the new Pokemon, any of the bugs on the new Pokemon, or any of the major issues that are plaguing most players. Instead, we're probably getting a downloadable content announcement. They're expecting us to pay for additional content for a game that doesn't work correctly. But there are some cases where the reverse has happened in a sense. Animal Crossing. This only really was added out of actually a Twitter conversation that I had with someone this morning, and I knew exactly what I wanted to talk about for this podcast. I mentioned earlier this was the original episode that I came up with, and I was like, I want to talk about this, and I want to talk about it in a long form way, and I think I'm going to start a podcast. And then from there, we somehow have like a ton of other ideas. But someone tweeted out that they were going to be playing Animal Crossing, the GameCube edition on stream, and me, being me, was like, why are you all obsessed with this game? What happened? I know so many people who played New Horizons and are now going back through previous generations of Animal Crossing looking for something. And rather than going to the 3DS game New Leaf, which has a massive content update that was added post-release, and playing through what is widely regarded as one of the most in-depth Animal Crossing games, they're going back to the GameCube. Now, Animal Crossing was a very ambitious game. It was completely changed in its development cycle. It was originally supposed to be a dungeon crawler, an action RPG, lots of time spent in the dungeons, sort of like Legend of Zelda, except with cutesy animals. And then the N64 64DD was cancelled. This was what the game relied on. So they published Animal Crossing in Japan and found success and decided for the GameCube they were going to polish up the game and then publish it in North America. Animal Crossing came out in 2001. Wildly ambitious. Essentially an open world game that couldn't handle the size of the world. So unlike using something like Jak and Daxter did on the PlayStation, where if the character was going too quickly and the world couldn't catch up, they had a Jak trip. And the tripping was infuriating to players, but what they didn't know at the time is the tripping allowed everything to catch up. The tripping all of a sudden took away that need for a loading screen. It was, okay, you need to stop. You're moving too quickly. Let the rest of the city load, and we'll unload some of it. Animal Crossing has this very minor delay where you're scrolling through your squares. And so you go down one square and then, oh, the game pauses for just a second. But you're in the new square, so it's okay. It also has the animation of doors loading longer, which is a very old trick for disguising the sort of loading into a new screen. And Animal Crossing did something that nobody had really thought to do yet, and they created like a casual game. It's one of the first casual games. If you want to talk about the cozy genre, or for better terms, the casual genre, Animal Crossing was one of the founders. It was this game where you were just supposed to sit down and take it easy. And for some reason, even back in the early 2000s, this really resonated with people. When all of these new games came out, they all had something new that they contributed. Wild World contributed the idea of a more seamless experience, being able to walk from place to place and not have that square load up. City Folk, I'm going to be honest, I don't remember a lot about City Folk, but City Folk was the first to have the capabilities for Wi-Fi and to visit your friends. It had a plaza, and it introduced more holidays, and you could also transfer your file from Wild World. Not everything transferred, but it was an attempt. They were giving the players something. New Leaf, which again is considered one of the best games in the franchise, gave players almost an unhinged amount of content. You had not just your few basic trees, but also so many tropical trees added on top of it. And then, of course, New Horizons, which had, I won't say great timing for its launch, but convenient timing for it, was right during lockdown. And it was when we needed to slow down and take care of ourselves the most. And so it took this game where the original intention was you were just with your friends. Well, the original revised intention was you were just with your friends and your little animal villagers, whatever you want to call them. And it just gave you this escape. For those that didn't play during the early stages of the pandemic, I have vivid memories of opening up the Dodo airport to go sort of see my friend's island, and everyone always had open islands, and I would see 8 islands pop up. I do not know that many people who play Animal Crossing nowadays, but there was something about that connection and that slowing down that really just gave us a chance to just all breathe in a really hectic time. So we have all these games that, in a sense, are like a baseline for nostalgia. I think a lot of people can agree that Nintendo maybe doesn't have the market cornered with it, but has a lot of franchises that a lot of people are really nostalgic for. Of course, there are things like Halo and Kingdom Hearts, which is a Sony exclusive. There's Metal Gear Solid, Resident Evil. I don't think Resident Evil is an exclusive. Not anymore, at least. But these are games that people really, really have a special place in their hearts for and remember fondly. I think we need to take a look at the bigger picture, though, and aside from the broken games that we're continuing to buy, ask ourselves, like, how has this changed what we're buying? And is there a better way to be buying games? So we're going to take a little bit of a step back here and talk just briefly about how important delays are in the video gaming industry and how crunch culture has really affected the games that we're getting. This might just be one of those stories that kids told each other, but I swear I read an article, and it might have been in a Nintendo Power, that Banjo-Tooie, the sequel to Banjo-Kazooie, was intended to be a 2-person cooperative game. Even with the delay for Banjo-Tooie, it didn't end up happening. They didn't have enough time, so they actually decided to remove the feature. Can't find any evidence for this anywhere on the internet. I was Googling furiously today looking for this. Couldn't find anything. Historically, some of the best video games in the industry have actually been delayed. This goes back all the way to Banjo-Kazooie, which was supposed to be a 1997 November release. It was pushed very hard for an American audience, and we knew exactly when it was coming out, and they delayed it to June 1998. It had, I think that's over a half a year delay. That's a big delay nowadays. You don't see that too often. But they decided that Banjo-Kazooie was not as polished as they would like it to be. And if you look at a lot of the critical reviews and the critical reception for the game back then, the only thing that Banjo-Kazooie was really faulted for was the camera. Everyone agreed that the game had a lot of depth. It felt like it would take a long time to play through it. Overall, it just performed exceedingly well for what it was. It had a fun story, fun characters, felt good to play. It still feels very good to play. The only thing that Banjo-Kazooie really frustrates me on is I don't always feel like I'm meant to play collectathons. And it's hard because you have to get all but 2 of the jiggies, I think, to get to the end. We're going to digress. Could talk about Banjo-Kazooie for a very long time. Breath of the Wild, which completely forgot, was originally a Wii U release title. It was 2015. that Breath of the Wild was announced for release. It's not uncommon for Legend of Zelda games to be delayed. And there's a bit of a conspiracy theory that the reason why it was actually delayed for the Wii U was because they wanted it as a Nintendo Switch launch title. We know that Legend of Zelda sells consoles, and they decided that they were moving on from the Wii U, and so they wanted to see it on a new console. In 2017, the Wii U was out. Breath of the Wild finally launched for the Nintendo Switch. This was a 2-year delay, a console change, and it is considered one of the greatest games ever made. It does a great open world. In a sense, took the good parts of the nostalgia and used them. It took the fact that we all know who Ganondorf is, and they put him in as Calamity Ganon. We all know who Princess Zelda is. She was still a main part of the franchise, and there was this huge emphasis on saving Zelda and making sure that she was okay, which of course is in every Legend of Zelda, but it feels more important in others than, like it does. It's more impactful. Say Ocarina of Time, it was very impactful and had a beautiful story, but I don't even remember Princess Zelda in Majora's Mask. I know I've played that game quite a bit. I don't even know if she's in it, to be honest. In Breath of the Wild, she was there as a very big focus. Like, this is about Zelda and Link, and it's about saving the world. So it took those really, really good parts that we loved. It took, including things like the different races that everyone kind of has come to love over time, like the Zora and those guys from Gerudo Valley, whose name I can't remember. And it implemented them and gave them a lot of backstory that we didn't have. So they used the really good parts of the nostalgia, and it kind of feels like they let the rest go. They said, we're not going to make you go through dungeons. You have the divine beasts, but I'm not entirely sure that counts as a dungeon. It's sort of like a puzzle and a step of progression that is completely optional for some reason. And then they also said, let's completely change the concept of the game. So we're not just taking out the dungeons. We're not just taking out the way that we run the inventory and just totally change it. We are giving you new crafting. You're going to have to watch your health. You're going to have to watch the heat exposure, the cold exposure. We're going to give you these divine beasts and these upgrades. We're going to give you an absolutely slapping story. And I think often overlooked is actually the prologue to the game that came out a couple of years later, which is Hyrule Warriors. They have a Calamity version. I think it's called just Calamity. Hyrule Warriors Calamity, something like that. And it actually fills in so many of the blanks that we have and shows you the story all leading up to Link being put to sleep. Link being put to rest for the amount of time that he was. And it gives us this open world that we had just never seen before. I don't know how to explain how good this is. It truly feels, for someone who does not like open world games, I hate them. I detest them. I need to be told what to do. I'm sorry. I like structure. I like being told, go here, go here, go here. Congratulations. You're on your way. You're doing great. Open worlds stress me out. They fatigue me. I'm not good at the casual genre at all. Couldn't tell you why. But Legend of Zelda, there is so much freedom in Breath of the Wild that, again, it feels like there's a paralysis of, where do I go? I think everyone's had this moment where they, come across a Lionel or something, which is a very difficult mob to fight. And you've got your branch and your little wooden thing, and you're like, I can take it down. I can do this. I'm the hero of Hyrule. I've got this. And then you realize 5 minutes later, you're like, I don't think I have this. I think I'm going to die now. We're gonna leave this area for a while and come back later. But the choices are there. And truly a lot of that is up to your gameplay skill, which we actually see in a lot of Souls-like games. Dark Souls, Bloodborne, Elden Ring. It is this fake wall, in a sense, that you have, where if you have the skill to successfully get by this challenge, you don't have to go do anything else. You don't have to grind levels. You don't have to go find weapon upgrades. You do not worry about any of that. You're going to get by this boss, and it's not going to be a problem. But if you don't have the skill and you don't have the capabilities of doing it, and that's not to shade people, these games are extremely difficult, then you actually end up having to go and grind things out and go find other options. You can go to Calamity Ganon right away if you really want to. They don't recommend it, and it's not the intention of the game, and it takes away a lot of really wonderful moments that you'll have, but the option is there. There are, of course, times when delays go wrong. Let's just be honest. I think The Last Guardian is pretty infamous for that. It was a follow up from a studio that was wildly popular, and a lot of people were really, really amped to see this game. I'm going to be honest, this is just for my recording. I didn't think I was going to be talking about The Last Guardian. I have no information down about it. But it was a follow up to a very successful, popular game. And this is what we were going to talk. People were amped for so many years. It was delayed again and again and again and again and again. And we actually saw that year quite a few game franchises either be announced a new title or released. One of which was ToeJam and Earl Back in the Groove, which was solid entry to the franchise. It wasn't bad. It wasn't great. It was just enjoyable. And we had Shenmue 3 come out, which people had been waiting for since I think 2003. These are all games that was preying on nostalgia once again. But then again, you have instances like Resident Evil 4. It's rumored that it was scrapped 4 times before it came out, and that game is largely considered a masterpiece. We've taken away the need for a lot of delays in launches, and the idea that we have to delay a game is sort of taken away from us, given the fact that developers now have the option to do very significant or large downloadable content jumps. The ability to just give you essentially a completely new game just because they've told you to purchase it and download it. And some developers have not quite jumped on that train and are still willing to give away content for free, especially if it was supposed to be there on release. We don't always see that. There are 2 parts to downloadable content. There are what's known as microtransactions, which is something that we see in most games, especially free-to-play games nowadays. They're very small purchases. And the first microtransaction sold by a major publisher was all the way back in 2006. Bethesda sold horse armor for the Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion, and it was only $2.50 for horse armor. Although microtransactions have definitely come along and gained a lot more popularity recently, there was a huge era when everyone wanted to game on their phones, but no one really knew the landscape of how to game on your phone yet. And so people made microtransactions, and they made a lot of money doing it. Clash of Clans is actually a pretty good mobile game. The problem with the game is most of the progression became about microtransactions. If you didn't have the money, you weren't going to be anywhere near the top players in Clash of Clans. It's just how it is. Before microtransactions, we had downloadable content. In technicality, the Dreamcast had the first DLC. It was nothing substantial. It was very small, but you could connect your Dreamcast to the internet and get some things. I think the DLC that most people remember first would have been on the Xbox. November 9th, 2004, one of the greatest video games of all time was released. It was Halo 2. It was developed by Bungie and published as a Xbox exclusive game. It was a follow-up to Halo Combat Evolved. This highly anticipated first-person shooter would see its first DLC only a few months later, April 25th, 2005. There were 2 packs that were released. The bonus map pack and the Killtacular map pack. There would be future map packs and eventually an all-season pass, if you will, where you could buy all of the DLC combined. But at the time, each map pack was released for $4.99 US. That's about $7.48 if you adjust it for inflation. This DLC allowed you to play multiplayer maps that you might enjoy online with your friends offline. I don't believe it was a necessary component at all, and you could play the maps online for free. But it's really what I like to refer to as the beginning of the end. After the Halo 2 map pack was released in 2005, we saw other developers quickly jump on board with the concept of charging gamers additional money to get content that maybe shouldn't have been included in the base game, but should have been considered. If you cannot get these map packs done for launch, why don't you push the game? Or why don't you allow it for free to players, whether they're offline or online? Now, the map packs were reasonably priced. $4.99 for two maps is not bad. You get to play them offline with your friends, and we all know that games like Halo have a lot of replayability in them, especially in multiplayer. It's when we started to see every single game get a season pass. The game wouldn't even be out yet. You could buy the game plus the season pass, or you could just buy the game. But you're probably going to want the season pass later, so you could buy the season pass now. It's when we see stories that are incomplete, in a sense, later get additional content. A game that was extremely guilty of this was BioShock Infinite. It really pains me to talk about this because, to me, BioShock is one of the few franchises that tells a near-perfect story. BioShock 1, I will play that game time and time again. And I don't really think I play it for the gameplay content, because it's not that it's bad. It's inventive and fun, and it's interesting for a first-person shooter, and the atmosphere alone can draw you in. But it is the idea and the concept that you just get this really good story. This was gaming in its prime, in a sense. We had this semi-linear gameplay where you're given a map, you're given a level, figure it out, but you've got a lot of story going on while you're figuring it out. And you had these little bits of lore that were completely unnecessary to find. You did not really need to experience all of it, but it was really cool when you found something and it got you really excited. And we used to see storytelling like this a lot more in different first-person shooters, some of which were games like Halo. Everyone can agree the original Halo trilogy had a really good story. And I told you it in such like these perfectly timed like chunks and cutscenes that it never felt like it was either taking you out of the game for too long and you had too much progress to set up. It followed one of the rules of storytelling that's very important. It puts you as close to the action as possible when you're first starting. It's not about building this odd and spectacular world around you to get you there. It's about, here's the story, here's your character, let's go. World building can be done in absolutely insane amount of different ways. And these first-person shooters somehow just figured out, like, this is how we do it. And then we verged off of it later, but we're trying to talk about DLC. Going back to BioShock Infinite, you had this game that had a really good story. And the ending, like all of the BioShock games, the ending was such a mindfuck. I remember just sitting there, and one of my sisters who hadn't seen all of BioShock was watching, like all the franchise was watching, and looked at me and said, "Is that the end? Is there more? What is happening?" And you just kind of shrug your shoulders and said, "Yeah, that's the end." They kind of all end on some sort of odd note, maybe not as weird as BioShock Infinite, but weird to some degree. And then BioShock Infinite Burial at Sea happened. And that was the true ending to the game, if you will. Was additional content with very story driven that showed you this is what's going to happen. You also had to pay more for it. BioShock Infinite put their ending behind a paywall, but everyone was okay with it because we claimed, oh, it was reasonably priced and the devs needed a bit more money and it's totally fine. It shouldn't matter, but it does. We're setting a new precedent. Every time a company launches new content that should have been thought of and included, we are now causing a problem. So we have the precedent set with something like BioShock Infinite. We have done things like this before. Dying Light also had this happen as well. All of a sudden there was like a whole new chapter to the story and that was not actually the end, which, by the way, like just going on record now, Dying Light, I pretend the DLC content doesn't exist. The ending was so horrendous that I felt cheated from the rest of the game. I was like, I don't like this franchise anymore. I've never played Dying Light 2. That might change eventually, but I've never played it for the reason that the story was honestly just so bad in the end. But then you had Nintendo. Nintendo was kind of kooky because Nintendo was almost 10 years on the dot late to the DLC game. Nintendo said, no, we're not really going to do this. Now, Nintendo's always had a lack of online functionality compared to other games. There's a certain amount of protection they want to have over the mostly kids who play their games, and to that I applaud them because, to be honest, growing up on Xbox Live was probably not the best idea for me. And then Nintendo released Mario Kart 8. And that's when Mario Kart 8 was when the mighty have fallen. Nintendo decided that they needed to make some of the money back on the Wii U. The company was in a bad spot. Let's paint the picture a little bit. The Wii U was commercially a complete flop. Nobody understood it. When the Wii launched, there was a commercial that I very distinctly remember, and I think they were either playing tennis or bowling in it. And the moment everyone saw that commercial, they just went, oh, I get it. I know what this is about. The same thing happened with the Switch. The launch commercial happened, and all you heard was that click noise. That invokes something in us. We know, okay. The console's portable? That's kind of weird. But they sold it. And that's what Nintendo's very good about, is selling very odd console designs to us. And some of them have been a failure, and the Wii U is a huge example of this. The company has admitted that the thing that kept them afloat was the DS and 3DS line. They had the market absolutely cornered on mobile devices and to play games on the go. PlayStation had released a PlayStation Portable and the PlayStation Vita, but because of the lack of support, they ultimately flopped and they weren't really considered a great gaming system on the go. But the DS was. Had a ton of support. The library is huge. It's extensive. Lots of third and first party games. And you can't go wrong with a lot of them. There's some weird stuff out there, but most of it's pretty okay. They just never hit that mark with the Wii U. The marketing was kind of funny. They put a U on the end of a console name, which ultimately would be a mistake. Although it used some of the same peripherals that the Wii used, the Wii U was a different idea. And we had some really good titles on it. You had things like Mario Kart, and of course a new Smash Brothers was on it. And they had Pac-Man 3, which utilized the console in a way that no other game really ever did. And it made full use of the gamepad. If you ever want to play an RTS that just plays phenomenally, go find a Wii U. Good luck. Go find a Wii U. Pick up a copy of Pac-Man 3. Again, good luck. And you will experience just like pure bliss from this game. It played phenomenally. But they wanted to make their money back, and they knew they had to. Nintendo was, again, in a bad spot. I can't completely blame them. But it never went away as part of the problem. They announced Mario Kart 8 would be getting, essentially, map packs. Now, we can't completely fault Nintendo. They did, again, in air quotations, reasonably price the DLC that they launched. But they were still adding new things that you had to purchase to get full content of the game. Now, in something like Mario Kart 8, it doesn't matter as much. It wasn't that horrendous to have this happen. It was just new tracks that you could purchase if you wanted to. But then a month before the release for the Mario Kart 8 DLC, Super Smash Bros. 4 had DLC announced. This is where it gets really tricky. Super Smash Bros. 4 was not releasing new stages. Ultimately, if you released a new stage for a fighting game, it was kind of irrelevant because on the competitive fighting scene, they only use a few stages and they're normally tuned to be a tournament stage. So all of the randomness that you would experience on things like the Kirby levels where there's the tree trying to blow you off, that's gone. All that happens is there is a stage and it's either 2 or 3 platforms. That's it. There are no random effects that happen. There is nothing that goes wild here. That is what Super Smash Bros. Is on the competitive scene. Super Smash Bros. Released new characters. This means that if you want to have even a slightly competitive edge, you would have to purchase every single one of these characters. You have to learn how to play against them. You have to learn how they play, and you have to decide, do I want to change to this character? The reason why Super Smash Bros. Is so successful is, yes, of course, because of casual people who buy it, but it's also because of the fighting community. And they've recently essentially killed off the fighting community, but we're not going to talk about that. I'm going to stop my brain right there. We're not talking about that one. But Super Smash Bros. 4, that's when it really, really hit a point where this was not okay. And we'd seen those points a little bit. We've seen them a little bit. So to recap, it was kind of Halo 2's fault. And I can't really get mad because it was an optional DLC that you could purchase and then play the maps offline, or you could just go online and play them too. But it all comes back to that time when Microsoft decided and Bungie decided, let's launch something. Let's do something crazy here. However, we're not going to end on that really sad note. How do we cut ties and where do we go from here? I think if you're going to include something like a DLC like the Mario Kart courses and Animal Crossing Happy Home into a subscription service. It is like a weird subscription DLC service. And I think the issue I take with it is that it is on a higher tier for the Nintendo subscription service. Having something like the Nintendo online subscription service is not a bad thing, because obviously they need to pay for online servers and everyone has one. Sony has one, Microsoft has one, Nintendo now has one. It is normal to pay to play online. Now there is Nintendo Online, and there's Nintendo Online Plus, and there's Game Pass 1 and Game Pass 2, and I think there's like 3 tiers of Game Pass or something. And there's also Xbox Live Gold, and there's PlayStation Now, and there's PlayStation Plus, and there's all these confusing tiers and all these things that add on. And in one way, like it does feel like slightly more predatory having a confusing tier list like that. And if Nintendo had just added the DLC as additional content to the base tier, where they also should have added the N64 and the Genesis, in my opinion, I don't think it would have been that bad. But now that they're adding an exclusive tier, it just makes me wonder, when they add things like the GameCube and they add things like the Game Boy, which inevitably are coming, they are going to make these at some point for the Nintendo Switch Online. You can sort of see them padding this system and adding all of the virtual console games onto it. Are they going to make a third tier? Is there going to be another new tier? Is there going to be more downloadable content on that tier? Or are we sticking at 2 tiers? Although this episode has been a little bit all over the place, it really encompasses the idea of nostalgia, downloadable content, and some of the predatory things that game developers do. And this includes things like loot boxes. It includes Fortnite. It includes Overwatch. It includes season passes. These are things that they take the idea of FOMO, okay, the fear of missing out, and they've put it into a transaction. They have made it so that you have to feel like you have to get all these virtual pixels, every single one, to feel complete in this game. I guarantee you, when you let go of that mindset, the games that you play become that much more enjoyable. Letting go of the idea of having to do a holiday event, when we know that the holidays are, for most people, a time when you gather with family and friends. Why do you have a 2-week limited holiday running over specifically Christmas and New Year's? Most people are not able to play. They are asking you to essentially make the decision of, hey, like, we know you might be going to see your family and traveling and seeing people you haven't seen in a while, but why don't you come back and play with us more? Because they want to feed into an addiction. They want to feed into this concept of always supporting this one game that you're playing. Don't get me wrong, holiday events are a great way for some people to have an escape, and I'm glad that they exist in that regard, but I don't like the limited quality of them. Get this item now or you're never going to get it. It's not okay. We live in an extremely capitalist society at this moment in time. Everything that we do is based on how much money do you make. We feel the need to put all of our self-worth onto how well we do at our job, and all of our self-worth into being able to afford everything we want. This is obviously not the purpose of life, but this is also not a philosophy podcast, so we're not going to talk about it. What are some actionable steps that we could take to stop supporting this? I think the most important one is being vocal. You don't always have to boycott everything. I know it's tempting to, and it's kind of fun to like rally behind something and be like, I'm not going to buy from Walmart because I don't like Walmart. Well, the reality is Walmart has really cheap groceries, and sometimes you have to buy from Walmart. But being vocal on a platform, especially with small developers, is so important because they do pay attention. And I think they read a lot more than we think they do. They're very involved in their communities, and telling them that we do not want microtransactions. We do not want this. We would rather purchase a full-priced game over giving you so much money just to get so far in content. And there are ways to submit feedback to game development companies of larger titles. I'm not sure how much they would read it, but I know that something like Pokemon Unite, for example, which has actually that loot box system, that season pass system, very predatory towards certain people. And when I say predatory, I am speaking towards people with mental illnesses or gambling addictions and children. These are the people we know that they target. They target people who are feeling unwell, or they target people who do not have the capacity to make that decision yet. That's the target. It's who they get. If you are able to, stop pre-ordering games. Don't buy a game that is broken until the developers fix it. By seeing a large drop in sales, and this is not an easy ask for a lot of people because There's so much excitement about getting a new game, and like I've totally been there. And we also don't have the video games journalism industry doing what they need to do. There's been a lot of hurt and a lot of distrust happening, partially because of Gamergate and because of the Games Journal Pro List and everything that happened and is tangled up in that. We don't have trust in our media. And so there's no way for us to really be like, I'm going to wait for this game and see what the reviewers say, because the reviewers aren't giving us always the honest opinion. They're giving us what they think we want to read. And I think that's a major problem. So you have something like Twitch. Problem with watching Twitch is now you're going to run into a bunch of game spoilers, because you never know how far is this person into this game. Are they getting it early? Are they getting it late? When are they going to actually give their opinion? And I think a lot of Twitch streamers base the value of the game a little bit differently. Because they're creating content, they're not just looking on, are they having fun with this game and are they really enjoying the game itself? But also, is their audience engaged? Something like Cult of the Lamb is a really big example of this. Now, I think Cult of the Lamb is a good game. Don't think it's the best roguelike by any means, but I think it plays really well and the base management is relatively fun. There are some parts that are insanely frustrating though, and it almost feels confusing when learning some of the aspects of it, possibly because the game has a lot of depth, but that is a very negative experience to someone who's new. But the Twitch integration and the draw that it had for people to be active in chat was enormous. I don't believe that Cult of the Lamb would have been as successful as it was, despite the fact that it's a good game, if they had not created such a brilliant and simple Twitch integration. Name your followers. Your followers can be a cult member. That's it. That's the integration they came up with. And it showed, though, to a lot of other people and a lot of developers that this can actually be something good. So you have Twitch people and you have YouTube people. On top of there being a lot of spoilers and not a lot of people wanting to share their opinions, because again, content creation puts a different value on the video game, you also have the issue of not all developers are utilizing these people and giving them keys. It's relatively easy to get a review key for a website. Here's the website, here's who I am, I'd like to be added to your press list, and can you please give me a key for the upcoming game? Yep, okay, sure, that's great, here's a key. They don't care. It's actually like extremely simple to do that. But you approach them as a Twitch streamer and suddenly it's a little bit different, right? Like, I only stream to this many people on average. I only have this many concurrent viewers. I only have this many followers. This is my reach. This is what I'll see. This is how long I intend to stream it for. Could you give me a key? We'd really like to check it out. Well, that potential reach of an article, which can be easily shared and widespread among people, and it's only like most people glance at articles, so they'll scroll down to the end, right? What was the score? What was the verdict here? Compare that to something like Twitch, where it's like, okay, so you only get maybe, let's say, 20 average viewers. Are all of your 20 average viewers going to bring a friend to your stream? I don't think so. And if they do, that'll only be 40, and then the 40 could maybe become like 60, but probably not likely. Becomes a bit of an issue. But when we take the opportunity to not pre-order a game, we actually just buy it when we've decided that this game is something that I want, something of value, it will show to developers, like, I don't want to purchase a broken game. And I say this as someone who bought Pokemon Scarlet and had some of the most fun I've ever had in a Pokemon game with this game. But it's still really broken. And there's a small part of me inside that like regrets it a tiny bit, because it's like, I know in the end my 10 million, like my one purchase, when there's been 10 million copies sold, it's broken all these records, will not matter. But it's still upsetting to like also know, first of all, that purchase does not matter. It's insignificant. But that, like I said, like, I'm okay with compromising my values of wanting a polished and finished game. Give me the game. Just like a small regret, very small. So we can submit feedback. We can stop buying things. If a developer says they're delaying a game, stop complaining about it. I don't know why people think they have the right to do this, but they go online and a game's been delayed, and I understand it's frustrating, especially if pre-orders were up and you once again pre-ordered a game, which, let's see answer A, stop pre-ordering games. I don't really think you have the right to complain though. They delayed the game because they want to give you the most polished and professional product that they can. If anything, admire them. Tell them thank you for making this product as perfect as it can be. I will be waiting when it comes out. Sometimes delays do nothing. We know this. Sometimes they're just these trash games that cannot be fixed. Actually, I think if any of you are card players, I think a lot about drafting cards. Sometimes, like when you're playing Magic and you go to draft Magic, you just end up with a really, like, a garbage pile. Literally call it a garbage pile. And you can't do anything to fix it. But other times you can like be patient and wait and see and fiddle, and then it's like this is actually okay. This could be redeemable. We could get there. I think this one is another really difficult one because there's not an easy way to stop this. Don't give in to things like loot boxes and season passes. This is an add-on to the game that just doesn't make sense and is unnecessary. I understand wanting to look cool and wanting to spice up your Fortnite character. You can do these in other ways though too. You could purchase V-Bucks directly, the in-game currency, and buy that character if you wanted. And in a sense, if you want to buy a battle pass, there's kind of nothing wrong with it, but at the same time it's telling them that the value that I want from this game is I want to be given this battle pass that I have to then grind out for the things that I purchased. I think that's kind of bullshit. If a company gives you the option for, like, let's say, limited time items and you just purchase them, which again is preying on the FOMO, so isn't a good idea, but you have that happen and then you don't have to grind it out, I think that's a much better business model, because for some people purchasing a battle pass and getting to the end is just not achievable, and then the FOMO steps in and then they buy the levels, and then now they're level 200 for some reason on the battle pass and it's day 3 because they know I'm an adult. I don't have that time. There's probably no way for me to convince people to stop buying DLC. I think people are going to do it no matter what, because if you enjoy a game, you want to continue supporting it. And again, there's nothing wrong with it, but in my opinion, there are 2 questions you can ask yourself before purchasing a DLC. Is it adding significant value to the game, and is it worth the cost? So is this, I don't want to say it, but is this adding on to the story? Is this something like Burial at Sea? Is this a game that you love and you really have to see the end and you can't just like read about it, so you really want to buy that DLC? There you go. It's probably worth the cost to you. And did you enjoy playing the game the first time around? Don't buy DLC for games you don't enjoy. I know people who do this and it really doesn't make a lot of sense here. If you want to talk about stupidity, I think this is it. If you think that game is bad, buying that DLC will not make that game any better. And especially do not buy DLC if it fixes the game, because that should be a free patch. Just end of discussion, free patch. That's a free patch.